very good morning and welcome. I'm your host, Alicia Jali. You're watching Media Monitor live on SABC News, Africa's news leader, right here on Channel 404. Now, the concept of this program is, of course, to monitor and evaluate media coverage of some of the major news stories of the week. We look at the story that did not make headlines and also look at the story behind the story. The aim of the show, once again, is to put the media in the spotlight. In our lineup today, we look at the media coverage of the elections. We delve into the Boko Haram admitting to kidnapping more than 200 girls in Nigeria. We analyze the media coverage of the Ukraine protests. We take a look at armed coup wage strikes that have been taking place for more than 3 months. And lastly, we dissect the Limpopo textbooks delivery system. To give us an analysis on media coverage of these stories, let's welcome Melo Maholeho, a columnist, a thought leader, Professor Stephen Friedman, a political analyst, and Dr. Yilva Rodney Gumede, who's the head of film and television at the University of Johannesburg. And also later, we will be joined on the line by Minette Nevo, researcher at Media Turner, who will give us a further insight into the Boko Haram tragedy. Remember, you can be part of our discussion today by calling us on +2711 714 6847, 714 6843, 714 6857. Share your views and comments on Twitter at SA Media Monitor and like our Facebook page, Media Monitor. Good morning to you. In our top story today, of course, Independent Electoral Commission Chairperson Banzi Tlakula yesterday officially declared the results of South Africa's 5th Democratic General Elections. The ANC secured 62.15% and 249 seats, while the Democratic Alliance won 89 seats with a 22.23% rather, followed by Julius Malema's Economic Freedom Fighters with a 25 seats and a 6.35% of the votes. Let's now take a look at this clip compiled by one of our producers, Sibu.
A record of 29 parties contested in the 2014 national and provincial elections, and 13 of these political parties received sufficient votes to have representation in the National Assembly. Top 3 winners are the ANC, DA and the EFF. President Jacob Zuma welcomed the results yesterday and thanked voters for returning the ANC to power.
Allow me to conclude by extending our profound gratitude to the more than 11 million people who voted for the ANC. The ANC is humbled in this victory by the confidence this majority showed.
Opposition parties, the DA and EFF, also welcomed the official results and thanked their supporters.
Because we have grown so fast, we would like to thank every single South African who voted for us on Wednesday. We deeply appreciate the support that you have given us.
We want to take this opportunity to thank the people of South Africa for having conducted successful elections, peaceful, free and fair. We are here as the economic freedom fighters to accept the results and take this opportunity to congratulate the ANC and the Democratic Alliance and all political parties.
Last night, thousands of African National Congress supporters celebrated their victory in the Johannesburg CBD, while DA leader Helen Zille received a warm welcome at her arrival in Cape Town.
Wow, panel. Finally, good morning and welcome to Media Monitor. Finally, the elections are a thing of the past. Panel, how do you think the media covered the overall elections from the registration process up until the aftermath? Professor, let's start with you.
Well, Alicia, I think there's a lot that needs to be fixed. I think that the media coverage was disappointing, and I'll give a few examples. I mean, the most obvious one is that there seem to be 2 standards in the media. There's one for the EFF and the other one for all the other parties. Mosia Lakota was quite rightly ridiculed for saying that he'd get 20% and getting less than 1. Paul Mashatile was ridiculed quite rightly for saying he'd get 70% and getting 54. Musi Maimane was quite rightly ridiculed for saying that he'd win Gauteng when he didn't. Julius Malema said he'd get over 50% and he got 6, and nobody found that particularly odd. So I think that's the first example. I think the media tend to hype up certain figures and others. I think also there was a failure of basic information. So I'll give you a few examples of that. We kept on hearing that it became a sort of massive thing among the media. There was going to be a coalition between the ANC and the EFF to change the constitution. Now, I mean, besides the fact that that just doesn't make political sense, the clause that the EFF wants to change in the constitution is the property clause, for which you need 75%, and ANC plus EFF doesn't equal 75%. So basically, you're talking about something which, if you know how the constitution works, didn't happen. Finally, at one stage, we were having serious discussions on trying to explain why we had such a high percentage poll when the percentage poll was in fact lower than before. And quite frankly, this morning I'm looking at one of the Sunday papers, a major Sunday paper, which still doesn't seem to be aware of how many parties got into Parliament. Yes. So I really think that there's a need to go back to basics here. Yes, there's a certain amount of drama and romanticism about elections, but making sure that you get the story straight and the facts accurate, I think, is the first priority of the media, and I don't think that it was always achieved in this election.
Absolutely. Now, Doctor, there was a lot of concern around the fact that there wasn't much voter education, and analysts all over kept on amplifying that fact. Do you feel that there was adequate voter education out there?
Well, yes and no. I do agree with Professor Friedman when he says that there's a lot of basics that weren't covered or weren't covered properly. And I do think that in terms of the voter education that we had, I think that the IEC always does a very good job of providing information to the news media. I now wish that we could have the same around certain issues in our constitution and around the constitution rather, and with Parliament and parliamentary seats as well, as Professor Friedman just pointed out. I think there's ground to cover there where the media could do so much more. This is information that's out there. This is basic stuff. And I do think, apart from the voter education now, there's a step going forward now where we need much more information about what's going to happen when the seats are taken up in Parliament, what's happening there, how many seats, how does Parliament function, etc., etc. That's necessary for voter education as well, going forward.
Now, a lot of people, Melu, attributed this to, of course, there was a 4.4% decline in terms of voters, and a lot of people were saying this is because voters did not know what to do when they got to the polls. Apparently, some of them actually didn't know what they were voting for until they were at the voting polls.
Well, I think I can sympathize with that sentiment to the extent that also when I went to go and cast my ballot, I was a little bit taken aback because I wasn't sure, am I voting just provincial, voting for the country? Yes. So that process
was confusing as well.
Because I mean, I've voted before, but then I think the media hadn't come up in terms of really just giving out the 1, 2, 3 of what is supposed to happen, like, because some people were confused about where to drop the things.
But was it the media's responsibility or the IEC's? That's the question.
No, fair enough. I mean, but then the IEC,
both of them hand in hand.
The IEC works in conjunction with the media because, I mean, the IEC is not a media organization. It's an electoral election organizing organization. So they depend on the context and the distribution channel, which the media in general has. So, but then for me, I think another interesting facet that cropped up in these elections is the use of social media. I mean, you had the issue with ballots in Linwood region, you had the issue in Alexander and Deep Sloot. I mean, one of the things that came up there is that journalists and ordinary citizens were picking up that there were irregularities happening long before the IEC's internal mechanisms could actually pick that up. So for me, I think for the next election, I'm predicting that the IEC would probably have sort of a social media team that can sit and monitor on social media the reports that are coming in from individual people and so on. And for me, I was very much encouraged to see that the media actually took that up and injected the role of social media. For example, in some of the press conferences that the IEC had, you had journalists, for example, your Aldrin St. Piers, your Govan Whittles, and so on, bringing the IEC to task about what people were reporting as happening. I think for me, another point is that, for example, in the US, one of the things that you have is that you have election outcomes announced on the day of the election, and one of the things that gets done is exit polls. Obviously, because given the violence that happens around elections, especially in KZN and whatever, that's not possible. But then I think that's something which, as a country, from a media establishment, we should aspire to have like election outcomes and maybe alleviate some of the concerns that they have about not having enough factual information, because when the information is dripping and drabbing over a long period of time, it becomes difficult, I think, to keep track.
All right, we're going to hold it there for now. And when we return, we'll continue to discuss the media coverage of the elections. You can send us your emails as well as your tweets. And of course, you can catch us on Facebook. Media Monitor returns shortly after this. No, you go to welcome back to recap. You see, go on, go on, go on, go on.
I would get a face flush and heat in the face from any kind of alcoholic products, from the chocolate, breads, bananas, starch. I would get a kind of a grinding, acrid feeling in the stomach.
Carol Atterbury estimated that over 20 foods triggered this discomfort, even common things like avocado, celery, lettuce, and black pepper. And in fact, almost any food can trigger food intolerance. But these days, lunches and dinners for people like Monica and Carol are much more enjoyable because of new understanding about the difference between food allergies and food intolerance.
Where in the past we've spoken for decades about food allergies, what we realize now...
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. And remember, you can be part of our discussion by calling us as well as sending us tweets. And we continue now, panel, on our discussion with the elections. Now, let's talk about the security issue, Professor. Do you think that the media adequately highlighted these issues? Because there was a lot of misunderstanding, even by the parties themselves, concerning the election rules as well.
I'm not sure I agree with you, Alicia. I mean, I certainly think that Mello is right, that social media plays a role in this. But the most important actors who play a role in making sure that there's no electoral fraud are the parties themselves. I think it's very important that the media are aware of what the parties are saying and pick up on it. Frankly, I thought that was one aspect of the election which, ironically, I was quite pleased with. I mean, there were several, yes, there were quite a few allegations of irregularities, yes, but that in a sense shows that the system is working. Okay, there may have been a couple of things that we weren't aware of. I doubt that very much. My suspicion is that whenever an irregularity occurred, we were aware of it. And that may have been partly through journalists and partly through social media, but it's also because the parties participate and the parties blow the whistle. And it does seem that in most cases swift action was taken. And I guess the proof of the pudding is here we are on Sunday morning and all the parties have accepted the results. But I think that the media should, I mean, if the media are on the ball on this issue, they should be working with the parties to make sure that when the parties actually identify irregularities, those are picked up and broadcast and disseminated in the media as well.
Absolutely. Miller?
No, I think I'm happy though, because I mean, for example, one of the things that he's mentioning about the parties being involved in the process, I mean, one of the things when that Linwood Ridge issue came up, Helen Zille initially, I think she also blew it up. She said she wants to know what's going on, find out, have those votes been counted, have they not?
Yes.
But eventually afterwards, I think she contacted her party agents on the ground, and they did tell her and confirm to her that those ballots had been counted. So then she went on social media again and disseminated that information, and that tended to, I think, ameliorate and calm people's tensions.
Now, the suspense on the outcome of the results have been killing everyone from voters to political parties. Has the media downplayed the announcement of the election results, Doctor?
Well, no, I think that there were no surprises. That, there were a lot of coverage that was sort of, became run of the mill for that. And of course, I think that we could have seen more coverage on why the smaller parties haven't made it into the elections. I think we still need a proper dissection of why Ahang disappeared completely after the elections, for example, and what's happening to smaller parties such as COPE that are sort of EFF's challenger in our last elections, for example.
So just one point. Sorry.
You go first, Miller, quickly.
Just one more point, like in terms of having people accept the elections and so on. I think one of the things that we should really be celebrating in this country is the fact that the media on a continual basis, while the counting process is going on, they're engaging the various party agents and getting feedback from them. And I think that step sort of builds confidence in the system, that the system is working and that people are accepting the outcome, as opposed to having this dark cloud that is hanging over the elections and no information is coming out, and then bang, ANC's got 62% and people don't want to accept that.
Very interesting, Melo. The SABC were actually broadcasting live throughout the elections, and I had one of the shows from midnight till 5 a.m. and it was live. So it was quite interesting to know that people were actually watching, but all the other stations were actually gone since 10 o'clock. So we were covering the elections and the results and the reactions from the parties on our own. Professor?
So I think one point in which the final announcement of the results was very important is if you have a look, the actual allocation of seats to the smaller parties was not what the media reported it was. And that's an example of what I'm talking about, because the way the IEC works, you need 1/4% of the vote, but there are always votes left over because parties don't get exactly 1/4%. Those votes are now distributed among the parties. So you see that Agang has 2 seats instead of 1. You see that the PAC is back in Parliament, the APC is back in Parliament. These were only announced at the time. And once again, you know, if you go back, you look at the electoral rules, you know how the system works, that could have been accurately reported.
Now, the EFF embarked on a protest outside the SABC, which was the base of the Johannesburg IEC counting centre. Now, the protest was centred around elections. Can we expect to see the upcoming weeks? What can expect to see in the upcoming weeks? Do you think that the media will still be dealing with the elections adequately? Melo?
No, I think in general, people have accepted the electoral outcome. And I think that is part and parcel of the fact that the party agents are consulted and they have regular briefings. Because, I mean, one of the things that IEC chairperson Pensi Tlakula noted in one of the press conferences is that party agents have opportunities to raise objections in the regular meetings that they hold while the counting process is still going on. So I think that engagement is very important, and I think that will contribute to people accepting the electoral outcome. I mean, obviously we had the one story that really worried me was the army being in Alexander, but then I hear now that that is sort of calming down.
The situation's been stabilized, Yes, Doctor.
I think there's a lot of coverage still needed and that will come through as well in the media. And of course, the questions change from elections results now to going forwards. And I do think that we might take a few cues from the coverage that we've had around the Pistorius trial, for example. If we can do election coverage like that and political coverage like that,
we'd be spot on. Thank you very much, Doctor. Well, we're going to leave it there for now, because when we return, we're going to look at the coverage of the 200 schoolgirls that were kidnapped in Nigeria by the Boko Haram and the Ukraine crisis. Remember, you can be part of our discussion by calling us on +2711 714 6843 714 6847 714 6857. Share your views and comments on Twitter at SA Media Monitor as well as Facebook. Stay with us. We return shortly after this.
I can't work it out. No, I think she's just going to Harvard for a year.
Oh, yeah, she says,
But according to my sources, the DA for the next year is going to be like a war zone.
Minette, good morning. How are you?
Morning, Alicia. Fine, and yourself?
I'm very well. Thank you, Minette. Thank you for joining us on the show today. Yes, I've got a few nice questions for you about this saga. All right.
Excellent. It's always nice.
All right, Minette. I'm going to quote you on your report here. And then, all right.
Perfect. No worries. I'm ready when you are. Sure.
All right. Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor, and you can be part of our discussion by calling us on the numbers that appear at the bottom of your screens, as well as contacting us on Facebook as well as Twitter. In our next story, South Africans and the international community joined the Bring Back Our Girls campaign on Thursday, calling for the release of the more than 200 Nigerian schoolgirls abducted by the Boko Haram group. Big international countries such as the US, China and Britain have joined the search and promised to help the Nigerian government. Now, to give us an analysis on the media coverage of the story, we welcome Minette Nevo, a researcher from Media Tenor. Minette, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us on Media Monitor.
Morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Minette, you wrote an article on the story, and it says a recent report by an international media research firm, Media Tenor, showed that the incident received the most attention in the UK, but coverage was still less than 0.8% of all media reports. And in order for a story to be impactful in the media, it has to breach the awareness threshold of 1.5% of all reports. Minette, please explain that to us.
Yes, at Media, we believe that for an issue to have any impact on what people talk about, impact on the public agenda, it has to reach a certain amount of coverage or salience on the media agenda. We call that the awareness threshold, and that's around about 1.5% of all coverage. So our reasoning is that the kidnapping of the schoolgirls hasn't quite reached that awareness threshold. So it's not something that's quite as prominent on the public agenda. People aren't talking about it enough yet for it to really be impactful and for hopefully, policymakers to start taking note.
Minette, which news platform showed more interest to the story? Is it mainly the print, online or television media?
For this particular project, at Media Tenor, we only looked at global TV news coverage. So unfortunately, I cannot comment on the different platforms, but what I can say is that of all the media we analyzed, and we looked at about 17 global TV news programs from 8 different countries, the BBC's BBC One News at 10 was most interested in the story.
Minette, please stay on the line with us. I just want to engage with my panel. Panel, how do you feel that the South African media has done in terms of reporting the story? Professor?
Well, I think in fairness, there was an election going on, and I guess that is an excuse. But I think that we were slow.
But Professor, the story was boiling before the elections.
Exactly. I think we were very slow to get onto it. I think people are talking about it now. But really, this has been an ongoing story for some time now. Yes. And I guess it gets back to a common theme, which is that we tend to pay far more attention to what happens in Western Europe and North America to what happens in our own continent. So it should have been an issue in our media a long time ago.
Melo?
Okay, I tend to echo the professor's sentiments here in terms of that we tend to ignore, I think, stories from the rest of the continent. And I think part of the reason is that people tend to solely blame the media for not being able to do that. But if you look at it, South Africa in general, I think we tend to be very ignorant in terms of what happens in the rest of the continent. Hence, you have columnists such as Adikayo Abidayo saying that South Africans tend to be very arrogant in their approach, and then the fact that Nigeria's economy now surpassed us maybe might be a welcome call for us to start integrating with the rest of the continent better. But I think that what you start seeing in the media then is that it's that microcosm of that dynamic that you have in the broader social structure in South Africa. But then obviously that is not an excuse for the media, because the media tends to be on the intellectual vanguard of society. Yes. So you'd expect that the media would be pushing forward such a progressive agenda in terms of being able to be aware of the broader continent and what's going on. I think another point is that in terms of news reportage, what you've been having is that you be having the establishment of stations such as ANN7, ENCA, even this SABC 24-hour news network. And part of the impetus driving that is that people want to tell African stories for Africans. But then one of the things that's constraining that endeavor is the fact that the news organizations are limited in terms of budgets in order to be able to place foreign correspondents maybe on the rest of the continent and so on. So what you tend to see happening is that you tend to see us siphoning information from those news organizations that tend to have reach on the continent. And that tend to be mainly what you call your British and maybe American news organizations. So that, I think, in itself undermines our capacity to be able to tell African stories for Africans, because what happens is that unless a story is a story in America or in Britain, then the story does not get reported here, precisely because we do not have the supposed news extraction capacity on the ground. So for me, I think one of the things that another thing that an author, I think a Kenyan author by Binyabanga Wainana mentioned is that even given all of that, when the opportunity arises and there's sufficient awareness about an issue, the one example that he used was the conflict in South Sudan between Riek Machar and Salva Kiir, was that African intellectuals in themselves are very, I think, hesitant to come out and put out views and so on in terms of what's happening on the ground. Absolutely. So what you have is that you have these guys at The Guardian in the UK or whatever coming out and drawing up this article and saying, no, there's ethnic conflict going on there. But then the question that he asks is that why is it that on the continent there's nobody who comes out and gives an alternative view? Because what happens is that those views then tend to drive the news agenda, and then that's all that we ever hear.
I think just to reinforce what Melo is saying, just bear in mind that the only reason that the story has become a story is because Mrs. Obama made it a story.
Absolutely, and that was my next point.
Which I think is a very sad reflection on the way in which we cover it.
Absolutely. Let's go back to Minette. Minette, now, how is the Nigerian media's coverage on the story? Are they questioning the government about their plans to rescue the girls?
Unfortunately, it's very difficult for us at Media Tenant to actually get access to the Nigerian media. So, again, I cannot comment exactly on what they are saying, but looking at what the international media agenda is saying is the focus is still very much on Boko Haram and what they're doing, and not so much on solutions, on what the government can do, on what the man on the street can do, and we find that somewhat worrisome.
Thank you so much, Minette. And she raises a very valuable point, because most articles seem to be concentrating more on the Boko Haram and nothing much is reported about the victims. What do you say about this kind of reporting, Doctor?
No, I mean, I couldn't hear all the things that Minette said now, but I think the point that we made here is that firstly, this is a massive story that should have been covered from day one. And the focus, of course, should have been on the victims and the girls and their families rather than maybe Boko Haram. That's part of the story, of course, and underlines the story. But I do think that the South African media has done a really, really poor job with this story, and I think that has to be said, and that the media has to take some flack for that as well. And it's been a focus, as you say, on the celebrities, Michelle Obama, etc., etc. And that is not good news coverage.
But really, did the march now by all the Joburg celebrities, impact have any impact in terms of attracting media coverage, Melo?
Yeah, but I mean, in South Africa in general, a story is not a story unless there's a toy.
Yes,
yeah.
And unless there's famous people in front of the rally, Professor.
Well, yeah, it does have the effect of making it a story here, yeah. It doesn't, unfortunately, influence what happens to the girls, but it does at least heighten awareness here of what is happening.
But I mean, when are we going to get more personal about the girls? When are we going to hear about their names, their families, and more? Why isn't media giving us that angle? Make it a humanitarian story.
I don't know. I think for me, that is one of the things that's been lacking. Maybe also, and part of the thing is that people tend to, I think, maybe assume that Boko Haram has been around for so long that, I don't know, there's just, even like on the Boko Haram element, there's a general lack of, I think, information in terms of what the organization is and what their mission is. So in terms of also, because if you look at the definition, I think, of what the word Boko Haram means, I think, opposed to Western teachings and so on. So for me, I find that very poignant that they went to a school and abducted girls from the school, and then from that angle we're also not getting. So in addition to not getting that human side, human interest side of the story, we're not also getting why is it that this story of the girls being abducted is so poignant to what the agenda that they're driving.
And we're going to leave it there on the kidnapping of the Nigerian girls. We'd like to thank Minette Nevo, a researcher from Media Tenor, for her views this morning. All right, moving on to our next story now. Citizens of Ukraine marked the Victory Day with separated celebrations on Friday. However, bloody clashes broke out between pro-Moscow protesters and Ukrainian forces in the part of Mariupol, leaving more than 20 people dead. Most countries call to be held on May the 25th. All right, now, panel, the eastern Ukrainian city of Mariupol has become a battleground. Is the media really giving us all details about why there's such upheaval in that country? Professor?
I think the coverage is there. I mean, the events are covered. And incidentally, this is an interesting story because, I mean, besides the fact that it's creating immense international tensions, I mean, there are worries about war, etc., which I think are probably exaggerated in terms of world war. But it's an issue locally. There's a lot of, there's a section of opinion in South Africa which feels very strongly that the West the West story is the only story that's told, and so they're supporting Putin and his supporters in the Ukraine. We've been told the events, but I think we've been a bit short on explanation.
Absolutely.
Because, look, admittedly, it is very difficult because on the one side you've got people who insist that Putin is an imperialist who's trying to destroy Ukrainian independence. On the other side, there are people who say that the Ukrainian leadership are simply puppets of the West. But it's precisely because there are those differences that we need, I think, some more explanation. And of course, the way to do this is that we fortunately do have academics in this country who do specialize in that region. And I think that we should be hearing a bit more about what they have to say.
Absolutely. Who's asking them, what they have? Melo?
For me, I think an interesting point that I'd like to echo what the professor said here in terms of there being a body of people that want to express a certain different sentiment to what the Western hegemony would have us believe. I think part of the reason that you notice why I think there's maybe such a sentiment is that in the media, I believe that there's a structural bias towards Western media. And that bias, I don't think it's maybe something that's witting or intentional on the part of the media, but it's because of a language dynamic, I think, that we pick up. The fact that I think we speak the same language as the UK and maybe the US, and then they tend to drive the news agenda, I think that tends to influence us in a certain way. Then what happens is that, for example, if you look at a lot of the stories about Ukraine, it's not authored by local journalists, but it's stuff that's being syndicated from your Reuters and your Bloomberg and your Washington Post and New York Times and so on. So what is happening essentially is that if you were to look for stories maybe from Russia or maybe stories from other South-South Axis members such as Brazil and maybe your Venezuelans and so on, you wouldn't be able to get those type of stories because those stories invariably, it's either English, Portuguese, Russian, or even from China, they're in Chinese. So that in itself, I think, creates the selection bias that I'm talking about. And then the selection bias that I'm talking about, if you're to understand from another angle, for example, if you're having a person maybe wants to eat meat, if you're choosing maybe chicken as your only source of meat, it's either you eating chicken or you're not eating any meat at all. And then what that so what you have is that the Western media is the chicken, but there are different other types of meat which you could be consuming, being your Chinese meat and so on. But at the end of the day, you're not able to consume that because of this language barrier that's been created, and it's creating the selection bias I'm talking about.
Very interesting view there, Melo, Doctor.
No, I just think that it's important to say that once again, there's certain bases that you have to cover as a journalist. And there are always analysts at hand. And I think that, of course, as much as we've gotten more of the historical background to the Ukraine conflict in the media, and the media has done that fairly well, and often through syndicated news items. It's in contrast to Nigeria once again. This is a story.
I was actually going to ask, versus Nigeria, how was the coverage?
You have people at hand. You can cover these stories equally, and you can cover them good because there are, we have fantastic historians and political analysts who can dissect these stories.
And journalists.
Yeah, and
Thank
journalists
you very
as well.
much there, Doctor. We're going to leave it there for now. Stay tuned because after the break, we look at the media coverage of the prolonged AMCU Platinum wage strike as well as the Limpopo textbooks delivery saga. You can be part of our discussion by calling us on +2711 714 6847, 714 6843, 714 6857. Share your views and comments on Twitter at SA Media Monitor as well as Facebook. Don't go anywhere. Return after this. Yeah, a professor needs water. You'll survive, Prof. New. But nobody said anything.
I'll cope with asking questions.
Yeah.
Data plus 5 gigs promo data for just $3.99, including ADSL and line rental.
I'll come back. Remember, you can be part of our discussion by contacting us on the numbers that will appear at the bottom of your screens. Not forgetting Facebook as well as Twitter. In our next story, mine workers affiliated to the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union, AMCU, at Lonmin, Anglo-American Platinum and Impala Platinum down tools on January 23, demanding a basic salary of 12,500 rand per month. Some workers had threatened to boycott the election in protest against the non-resolution of the strike, although voting proceeded without incident in the volatile Northwest Platinum Belt on Wednesday. Let's take a look at this insert.
All the employers of the mining or the platinum sector, if you too, you see the lines, all the employers are here to vote. Why? Because we want the government who can hear our voice.
When you look at the rate of unemployment, the question can also be asked, how are these unemployed majority of people of South Africa, how are they surviving at the end of the day? So this is a struggle. This is a sacrifice that our members are putting, saying, enough, it's enough.
Now, panel, has the media abandoned the AMCU strike because there was elections and the Oscar Pistorius case going on? Let's start with you, Doctor.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, and that would have happened, you know. But we were just saying in the break here that, you know, a lot of stories have, of course, fallen off the agenda during the last couple of weeks because of elections, but we've also had a strong focus then on the Oscar Pistorius trial, even though less so maybe from, you know, comparatively to the first couple of weeks. But a lot of these stories have fallen off the agenda, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what the media does with service delivery protests and strikes in the mining sector in terms of the election results as well, because there are correlations and parallels to be drawn here in terms of how we analyze these stories.
Melo.
For me, I think this AMCU story is very interesting because I think two angles that I'd really love to see I'm not really getting from the media. Yeah. The one angle is whatever settlements that gets reached in the platinum sector, what effect that will have on NUM and the broader ANC-led alliance. Because, I mean, obviously, one of the things is that if now AMCU comes out and they settle at 12,500 rand and NUM has been happy to go along with these 6%, 7% hikes, now obviously that threatens, I think, their credibility and their standing within the broader mining community.
So they could also start striking now? Possibly.
Well, that's the one outcome. The other outcome is that people could start jumping over to AMCU and it could expand broader than the platinum sector to other types of mining areas. I think that's one thing also that I'd love to see. And also I think the other thing also in terms of the settlement package that had come out, that the Implats, and Lonmin had been offering the miners, is that they were offering something like 12,500 cash remuneration, and then AMCU had saying, no, they just want 12,500. For me, like at one point, I was very confused because I didn't understand what is the difference, what is one person saying and what is the other saying. So I found that in the media, unless you actually went yourself and did a little bit of digging, you actually couldn't really differentiate.
Just reading those stories. Yeah.
Exactly, because I mean, part of the thing is that Joseph Mathunjwa is accusing those mining houses from sending that they were sending SMSs to the workers and so on. And I think also, if I was an ordinary worker, I'd also be very confused as that why isn't Joseph Mathunjwa accepting the offer? Because the mining houses are saying here's 12,500, but then they're not accepting it. And I think for me, another issue that's very material in this negotiation process going on is that the mining houses had come up and said that they're going to offer a deal till 2017.
Yes.
For me, one thing that's very interesting in that is that in 2017, we're going to be having the ANC elective conference, and in 2019, we're going to have the next election. So for me, I do not really know whether it's wise or not to make an election that's going to expire when we're going to have the ANC elective conference, especially given the political realignment that might be going on in the country at the moment.
Interesting observation. Let's take Skumbuzo from Rustenburg. Skumbuzo, you're our first caller. Thank you for joining us. Your comment, please.
Morning, how are you people?
Oh, very well, thank you. Skumbuzo, please go ahead.
Yes, actually, I'm in the mining industry. I'm an artisan by the trade. I would like to send my view to the people, even to you. You must know this, that the AMCU is really leading the people to the poor, people that are going to be poor, because as far as I know, just now, the Lonmin is said next week, according to their report, after they've been sending the SMSs to the people. So according to what they got from the people, the majority of the people, they want to come back to work. So what I think it must be happened that government must protect the people, the workers with security. That's all. Because really, AMCO had led people to the forest. Nothing they will get because this guy, Joseph Matunzo, I think he must celebrate when the workers are feeling and saying they want to come back to work, because if it's not so, the people, the workers, they will turn on his back because he led them to nowhere. He promised them something which is impossible. So I think he must celebrate and allow the workers to go back to work peacefully. They mustn't harm him. And the real thing is work. Other thing that's going to happen, because the mining told the people that they must come back. It back them. They must come back to work. You see. So if they don't come back, the mining really is ready, because I think in South Africa we are ruled by the majority. The majority of South Africans, they don't want to lose their jobs, or they don't want to see mining industry getting closed. You see, the shaft. They don't want to see the shafts getting closed. So that if they don't want to see the shaft getting closed, they must decide the mining, because they must close out for these people who doesn't want to pitch up to come back to work and get new people who can work. This is all about right now, because other people are back at work and there's others which are not back at work. So what I'm saying is that they must just release people they must go back to work. They have a lot of responsibilities. Unlike him, he's sleeping with the chicken curry. He's rich. He's eating. You see, and other thing, the man that miners are paying, it just goes straight to his account. You see, which is indicating that this man is just using these people.
Thank you so much, Skhumbuzo, for your views there. Well, Skhumbuzo basically appealing to government to send security, because he is rightly pointing out that some miners really do want to go back to work. We're going to leave it there on that story and move on to our next story now. The Department of Basic Education has again come under spotlight after it failed to deliver textbooks on time at the beginning of this year's curriculum in some schools in Limpopo. Now, last month, a civil rights group took the matter to court to force Limpopo education authorities to deliver outstanding textbooks. The North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria ruled that the Basic Education Department has violated pupils' rights to education by failing to deliver the textbooks in Limpopo on time. Now, panel, this is not the first time that this department has been dragged to the court over the same issue. Has the media successfully probed where the miscommunication seems to be, Doctor?
No, I don't think so, actually. And I think that this is an interesting example where the media actually got the story from civil society. They were the first ones to pick up on what became known as the textbook saga, which is not a great name, actually, but because it is a catastrophe in my mind and many others. But I do think that here we have to follow up, and we have to have people who can actually put the pressure on and keep the story in the media, because there's much more to be said, as we see now.
Maybe they can hold some people and bring them to account. Melo?
Yes, I fully agree with the doctor in terms of following up and holding people to account. Because I think one of the things in South Africa, I think we tend to be in love with social rights litigation. I mean, we take issues to court and the court rules on them, and then the outcome is favorable, and we think we can step off the gas pedal because then the issue has been resolved. But I think this issue needs to be followed up by the media to make sure that the government does make those reforms that are necessary and so on, so that people can continue being able to get quality education in the province.
Now, the judge ruled, Professor, that the department had in fact violated the pupils' rights by not delivering. But has the media probed now that side of the pupils suffering in terms of not receiving education, quality education on time? And we saw that Limpopo was actually one of the suffering provinces when it came to matric pass rates.
No, I think you do read those sorts of stories, but I think the problem is that, look, I don't think the media should be blamed for the fact that they pick this up from activist groups, from campaigning groups. That's the way it happens. The media has limited sources, and that's generally how it should happen. I think where I would agree with my colleagues is that that's the beginning of the story. What's supposed to happen afterwards is that you're supposed to start following up and asking these questions. Now, I don't think that I mean, perhaps we could have more on the conditions of the pupils, but I think it's generally accepted that learners suffer as a result of this. But there are a lot of follow-up, as people are saying, there are a lot of follow-up stories you can do about why does this happen in the first place? What political impact is it having? Is the Department of Basic Education taking this seriously? What is the relationship between the national department and the provincial department? I mean, these are all obvious stories which need to be followed up. I think the problem is that the only thing that is considered news is the press release by the campaigning organisation and the ruling by the judge, which really should be the beginning of the story.
Let's take Innocent from Johannesburg on the line. Innocent, are you still with us on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, we're very well, thank you, Innocent. Please go ahead with your comments, sir.
I think one thing that we, as South African, we should be clear on is the fact that the media have abandoned whatever that is happening in the Marikana area, not only because of Oscar Pistorius, because even before the case of Oscar Pistorius, they didn't cover up, for instance, when the workers were killed in Marikana. We didn't get from the SABC in details what is that have happened. Because if you actually watch the DVD, the videos that are going around, and what was shown by SABC, different channels, is totally different. We didn't get in details what happened. And now then they abandon it totally in this strike because of the Oscar, then the elections. And that is we should mention the SABC on those things, because most of the times just across the country, when there's these strikes of workers, when there's this protest and so on, what the final product that is shown in the TV at times it might not be exactly what is being picked up by that camera in that particular scene. That is SABC when they screen. Either they're actually sleeping in the same blanket with government, don't want to show this is what is happening under these particular leaders, and so on and so on. And that is my participation.
Thank you so much, Innocent from Johannesburg. And that's where we're going to leave it on this segment. And after the break, we get to read your tweets and also discuss what the analysts anticipate will be the most talked about topics for this coming week. Share your views and comments on Twitter at SA Media Monitor, as well as Facebook. Don't go anywhere. We return shortly after this.
One is not going to make it.
I don't think he's going to make it to camera.
I mean, we have little gems like this to start off the week.
No, but I think that the Devani story is interesting because he had a good opportunity to show the how the legal system works, how the police work.
All right.
If we were to make the Oscar arguments for my cover these kind of cases,
half the interest in the filing commission.
Panel, behave. Welcome back. This is our final segment. And of course, this is where we get to see what some of you, our loyal viewers, have sent to us concerning some of the topics that we've been talking about today. Our first tweet says, pity media coverage benefited few political. I don't know who sent us that tweet. I can't see. That's Mazwai Voklega. Thank you so much, Mazwai Voklega. Says, pity media coverage benefited few political parties. Some didn't even get that airplay. Media must be fair to all. Thank you so much, Mazwai for your comment there. Kayaka, she says all ANC splinter groups never survive beyond the first election. UDM, COPE, and possibly the EFF. Thank you so much, Kaya, for your comment there. Heloise Cupido says one-man parties will never work. They doomed to remain small. Thank you so much for that comment there. Steve Takadi says Ahang president showed poor leadership qualities. I had faith in her until she started that back and forth drama with Zilla. And last but not least, Amos Sitole says big thanks to that South African woman. African countries should have done this long back. Thank you so much to all our viewers for all your comments and tweets that you've sent us today. Very insightful views. Now, panel, what do you anticipate will be the leading stories this week? I know that Lindiwe Mazibuko's quitting is going to be quite developmental. Professor?
Well, I think it's part of a bigger trend which you'll see this week. I think that now the election is over, you're going to have a lot of stuff in the media about what's going to happen with the cabinet appointments, about what's going to happen with the leadership of the DA. In fact, it's already started this morning. People saying this one's to blame and that's one's to blame. These are interesting stories, but I think we must remember that in most cases the media get these stories from politicians who are trying to fight battles inside.
Exactly. Why are we only hearing about this now? I mean, you can't wake up just one day and then you decided to quit, surely.
No. Well, the point is that, yes, I mean, she apparently didn't even tell Zilla about this. But I mean, I'm sure that various political conclusions will be drawn by this over the next few days. And that will be quite interesting. But I think it's always necessary for viewers and listeners to bear in mind that, you know, behind the scenes, there are politicians pushing agendas in order to get you to believe certain things.
Thank you so much, Professor. Doctor?
It's yet to see what happens with that story. I think, hope we're going to see more on the World Economic Forum, the Nigerian story as well. And we might see some stories coming out of the Divani trial that starts on Monday as well.
Melo?
Yeah, I think I have to echo that. I think Divani is going to come up in the media. And Oscar, I think they're presenting closing arguments, so they'll be wrapping up. So I think there'll be a bit of a ramp up there. And I think the one story that I'd really like to see a bit of coverage on is the Boko Haram story, a little bit more information on what Boko Haram is, what their mission is, and so it's a bit of background information. Because, I mean, if you look now on the internet, for example, even on international publications, it's only your Wall Street journals and the New York Times that are really providing incisive descriptions and coverage of what it is that Boko Haram is trying to achieve.
But why should we go on the internet to search for information on overseas mediums, Melo?
But that's precisely what I'm saying, is that I'm hoping that our own media will be able to provide that information so that people can really understand. It's part of that conscientization process that people must be able to resonate and identify, I think, with the broader continent, as it were.
All right, so people must let the elections be now. It's been done and dusted. Well, thank you very much, panel, for joining us this morning and for your insightful views. And, of course, our viewers' contributions and suggestions is highly valued. Remember, you can email us your views about the show at mediamonitor@sabc.co.za. Share your views and comments on Facebook. Go to www.facebook.com/Media Monitor and like our page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SA Media Monitor. Thank you so much for watching Media Monitor. Join us again next week, same time, same place. From myself, Alicia Jali, and the rest of the QTIV team, have yourself a blessed Sunday and a wonderful Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Goodbye.
Giving them a go for an hour. No. Just take the phone and say, for years. I'm nearly finished. Years ago, a pastor with us and worship leader, Tom Ingalls, who's now in Australia for many years, he said there was a couple staying below him in an apartment where he was staying above them. And he said, when I got saved, I made up my mind to go to everybody that I've been fighting about this born-again thing. He's a Scotsman. Scotchmen argue no matter what you're going to say. They'll love to have an argument with you. Just an excuse for anything. But anyways, he said, and you know, it's so amazing. I went downstairs to this old couple, knocked on the door, and the husband came to the door, yes. He said, Mr. So-and-so, I've gotten saved. And he turned to his wife and he said to his wife, scratch Tom Ingalls off the list. That's humility. Amen? They were praying for him all the time. Let's stand this morning. Before we have communion, let's just worship God. Let him deal with your heart. No human being has ever sought the grace of God and never found it. God's grace is here for you today. It's reaching out towards you. God loves you unconditionally. God has a beautiful plan for your life. God wants to come and live in your heart and to live through your life. If you do the coming, he does the saving. If you do the coming, he does the healing. He says, come unto me. He rejects nobody. He's the God of inclusion, not exclusion. So I want you right where you are right now, at this moment. It's a God moment. It's a very, very important moment for you to choose Jesus and to choose life. Come, let us pray together. Lord Jesus, we thank you for dying on the cross for us. We thank you that you shed your blood for me. Thank you that I believe with all my heart you've been raised from the dead. I now receive you as my Lord and as my Savior.
Joy for these shows because
Yebo. Maruma, can you hear him?
Eh?
Speak again. Nope. 2. Okay, but please sort it out. The sound same thing.
Eh? Kai. Come on. Oh, usually get petrol.
Tabo Modesani, executive producer.
Eh?
Man, I've called you 6 times, you're not responding. What's up? Oh.
man, you must listen. What's up?
Are you sleeping, my man? Are you seriously sleeping?
Hey, guys, not now. Kenya yi. Oh. Yes, I am.
Likaina. Rona, kitu chibutse. Okay. Ishap. Yebo. Morning. Good and you? Thank you.
Yes, sir. Not much work on with you, Rootsman.
That's okay.
May I'm a Rootsman like that, you know. Blessed.
All right.
It's so embarrassing.
Center.